How have greenhouse gases affected us here in Canada? Well, Canada is a very big country, and so we have the potential to do a lot of harm, but also do a lot of good. If we're able to make a big change at a national scale, that will affect the worldwide greenhouse emissions. So let's take a look at Canada's record here, right? In Canada's record, we can see kind of compared to other countries, other large industrial countries, we're not too bad. Canada is out down there with Australia and Mexico and Germany, which are much smaller countries. If we take a look at the left side of this graph, and we look at China, the United States, and India, well, these are countries that produce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. And greenhouse gas emissions are measured in megatons of CO2 equivalent. So we're not just measuring CO2, carbon dioxide, we're measuring all greenhouse gases, but we're kind of converting them into as if they were all carbon dioxide. Canada's record here per capita, however, is not as good. So the previous graph was just kind of on a total scale. But if we look at Canada's record per number of people, well, now Canada has kind of shifted over to the left side of this graph, which is not where they want to be. Their emissions are much higher than smaller countries that have more people. And so this is kind of where Canada's problem is that yes, we do not emit a lot of greenhouse gases on a global scale, but we do emit a lot of greenhouse gases per person living in the country. Canada's provinces kind of tell a very mixed story. If we're looking at just kind of the total emissions per province, well, we can see that the smaller provinces emit a lot less, and particularly up in the territories. We can see that places like Ontario and Alberta are emitting a lot of greenhouse gases. If we then take that graph, but then look back again at the per capita emissions, well, then Ontario looks like they're doing a lot better. Ontario is a big province and it's a very populated province, and therefore the emissions per person are actually relatively low. If we're looking at a place like Alberta, well, here we have the highest CO2 equivalents emitted per capita, so that's per person. Alberta emits a lot of greenhouse gases, and then Saskatchewan is not too far behind. So what are the sources of greenhouse gases in Canada? Well, this is based on data from 2006, so it is quite old, but it's production and the using of electricity is high up there. Transportation, such as cars and trucks, airplanes and trains. And then all the way at the bottom, we're kind of looking at the land use of forestry, waste management, and other industrial processes. Canada is not a huge kind of industrial country in this terms of production compared to some other countries. But of course, we have, a lot of people in Canada are going to, for example, drive their own cars, or because of our climate, it's very hot in the summer, very cold in the winter. We're using a lot of energy to heat and cool our homes. So Canada does have a lot of forests, and you would think that is a good thing. And of course it is generally, because healthy forests are great carbon sinks. However, large forests can be large sources of carbon when they're damaged. And so if we don't protect our forests, what we end up doing is we end up emitting a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. When forests are damaged due to insects, wildlife, deforestation, wildfires, for example, those dead or dying trees end up producing a lot of CO2. So what are we going to do? What's Canada's plan here? Well, Canada has a couple plans. The big lofty goal is to become net zero by 2050. Net zero means that Canada's plan is to produce either no emissions, or in a case where emissions must be produced, they must also be offset. So that is planting enough trees to offset the emissions of carbon. We can see here that Canada's plans have kind of evolved over the last few years. There's been a lot of global climate agreements. And so, before Canada's climate plans, you were looking at 800 some odd million tons of CO2 equivalents emitted. And the plan is that by 2030, we're going to have a large reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. So these are built on this enhanced Paris Agreement and some pan-Canadian frameworks. So these are Canada's goals. However, Canada's goals do change often. A lot of the times, a country's greenhouse goals are dictated by politics. So, if new government comes in, these goals may change. They may get better or they may get worse. And then a lot of this is also left up to the provinces. So while Canada can kind of dictate on a federal level, each province also has its own rules that it will abide by and its own kind of provincial goals.